My twin sons laughed at my lottery numbers for 30 years, but they cried when I walked away with the winning check. That's what happens when the people you love most think your dreams are a joke. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. If you also believe that we still have value, even after 60, type 1 in the comments. And please, leave a like and subscribe. Let's show them we're stronger together. My name is Evelyn Harper, and I'm 79 years old. I live in a small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, where the L train rattles past my kitchen window every morning at 7:15 sharp. The sound used to wake me up when I first moved here, but now it's become my alarm clock, a mechanical companion in a life that's grown quieter than I ever imagined it would be. This morning was like every other morning for the past 5 years. I shuffled to my tiny kitchen in my worn terrycloth slippers, the ones with a hole near the left big toe that I keep meaning to throw away but never do. The linoleum floor was cold against my feet, even through the thin fabric. I reached for my favorite mug, a chipped ceramic piece with faded roses that my mother gave me 40 years ago, and filled it with instant coffee because real coffee is a luxury I've learned to live without. The apartment is small, barely 600 square feet, but it's mine. The walls are painted a pale yellow that was supposed to feel cheerful, but instead feels tired. Like everything else in my life, family photos line the narrow hallway leading to my bedroom. Pictures of Jake and Ryan as babies, toddlers, teenagers, young men at their college graduations. In every photo, I'm smiling proudly beside them, my arm around their shoulders, my eyes bright with hope for their futures. But those photos have become painful reminders of what I used to mean to them, before I became an inconvenience they preferred to forget. As I stirred my coffee, I heard the familiar buzz of my phone on the kitchen table. For a moment, just a fleeting, foolish moment, my heart lifted. Maybe it was Jake calling to check on me. Maybe Ryan remembered that yesterday was the anniversary of his father's death, and he wanted to share a memory. Maybe one of my sons had woken up thinking about their mother and decided to bridge the growing silence between us. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers, the arthritis in my knuckles making even simple tasks painful these days. But it wasn't a call. It was a text message from Jake, sent to both me and Ryan in a group chat I hadn't even known existed. "Hey Mom, we're canceling Sunday dinner this week. Something came up. Maybe next time." That was it. No apology. No explanation. No acknowledgement that Sunday dinner was the only time I saw my sons anymore. The only 2 hours a month when I felt like I still had a family. I stared at that message for a long time, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Something came up. Such casual words to describe the shattering of the one thing I looked forward to each month. I wondered what was more important than their mother. Work, probably. Or their wives' plans. Or anything, really. Because everything seemed to take priority over spending time with the woman who had raised them alone. I set the phone down and walked to the living room, where my old recliner sat facing the window. The chair is threadbare now, its burgundy fabric faded to a dusty pink, but it's the most comfortable spot in the apartment. I settled into it and reached for the small wooden box on the side table, a box that holds my most precious possession. Inside that box is a piece of paper, folded and refolded so many times that the creases have worn thin and the edges have started to fray. Written on that paper, in my careful cursive handwriting, are 6 numbers: 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and 49. They're not random numbers. They mean something. 7 for the day Jake was born, 14 for Ryan's birthday, 23 for the date I married their father, 31 for the day he died, 42 for my age when I became a widow, and 49, that was going to be our 25th wedding anniversary, the celebration we never got to have. Every week for 30 years, I've played those same numbers in the Illinois State Lottery. $52 a year, paid for with quarters saved from laundry money and dollars scraped together from my Social Security check. It's not much, but it's been my secret rebellion against a life that has slowly shrunk down to doctor's appointments, grocery store trips, and long evenings waiting for phone calls that never come. Jake and Ryan used to laugh at my lottery tickets when they were teenagers. "Mom, you know the odds, right?" Jake would say. his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that only comes from a 17-year-old who thinks he knows everything. "You've got a better chance of getting struck by lightning than winning that thing." Ryan would join in, shaking his head with mock concern. "It's just throwing money away, Mom. You could buy something useful instead." As if $52 a year would somehow transform my life. As if those $12 a week represented some massive financial irresponsibility, rather than the only hope I allowed myself to maintain. But they didn't understand. It was never about the money. Not really. It was about believing that somewhere in the universe, there was still a chance for something magical to happen to Evelyn Harper. It was about maintaining faith that my story wasn't over, that there might still be chapters to write that didn't involve sitting alone in a quiet apartment, watching the years slip by while my sons built lives that had no room for their mother. The laughter stopped when they moved away for college, then jobs, then marriages. But it was replaced by something worse: indifference. They stopped teasing me about the lottery because they stopped talking to me about anything that mattered. Our conversations became polite but distant, focused on weather and health issues and surface-level updates about their careers. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Jake would ask during our brief monthly phone calls, but I could hear the distraction in his voice, the sound of typing in the background as he multitasked through our conversation. "Fine," I would always answer. Because what else could I say? That I was lonely? That some days I didn't speak to another human being except for the cashier at the grocery store? That I had started talking to the photographs on my wall because the silence in the apartment had become unbearable? This morning, after Jake's dismissive text about Sunday dinner, I unfolded my lottery numbers and stared at them through tears I hadn't realized were falling. These numbers represented everything I had loved and lost. They were my connection to happier times, to a life when I was essential to someone, when my days had purpose beyond simply enduring them. I remembered the day I chose each number, the significance they held when my life was full of people who needed me. Now they felt like artifacts from an archaeological dig, remnants of a civilization that had crumbled so slowly I hadn't noticed until I was standing alone in the ruins. But as I sat there in my faded recliner, holding my worn piece of paper, something inside me refused to surrender completely. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the last flickering ember of hope. Or maybe it was just the muscle memory of a woman who had spent decades fighting for her family's survival and didn't know how to stop fighting, even when the battle seemed lost. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back in the wooden box, then reached for my purse. It was time for my weekly trip to Murphy's Corner store, where old Mr. Murphy would smile kindly and ask about my numbers as he printed my lottery ticket. It was time to buy another week's worth of hope, another 7 days of believing that somewhere in the mathematical chaos of random drawings, the universe might still remember that Evelyn Harper deserved something beautiful. The walk to Murphy's Corner store takes me past the old elementary school where Jake and Ryan learned to read, where I spent countless afternoons volunteering in their classrooms because I couldn't afford to contribute money to school fundraisers. But I could give my time. The building looks smaller now, its red brick facade weathered by Chicago winters, but the playground still echoes with ghost voices of children who have long since grown up and moved away. I remember the day Jake came home with a bloody nose and torn shirt, tears streaming down his 6-year-old face. "Tommy Peterson said we don't have a dad." He sobbed into my shoulder. "He said we're different because it's just you." I held him tight that afternoon, smoothing his dark hair while Ryan pressed close to my other side. Both boys seeking comfort I wasn't sure I could provide. "You're not different," I whispered. "You're special, and I love you enough for 2 parents." Huh, but love didn't pay for new school clothes when theirs wore thin. Love didn't put fresh groceries in the refrigerator when my paycheck from the diner barely covered rent. Love didn't ease the exhaustion that settled deep in my bones after working double shifts just to keep us afloat. Their father, Michael, had been a good man with big dreams and a weak heart. He died on a Tuesday morning in March, dropping to the kitchen floor while making coffee before his shift at the construction site. The heart attack was massive and quick. The doctor said he probably didn't suffer. But we did. Oh, how we suffered. The life insurance policy we thought would protect us turned out to be insufficient, eaten away by medical bills and funeral costs, and the 1,000 small expenses that accumulate when you're trying to rebuild a life around a man-shaped hole. I was 31 years old with two 5-year-old boys and a high school education that qualified me for exactly nothing that paid enough to support a family. So I learned to do everything. I waitressed at Mel's Diner downtown, serving coffee and eggs to truck drivers and office workers who left dollar tips and called me honey, with voices that carried either kindness or condescension, depending on their mood. I cleaned houses for wealthy families in Lincoln Park, scrubbing their toilets and mopping their floors while my own apartment remained cluttered and neglected because I had no energy left for my own housework. On weekends, I took in sewing, hemming pants, taking in dresses, repairing tears in children's clothes for neighbors who paid me $5 or $10 for work that took hours to complete properly. My fingers became permanently pricked with needle marks, and I developed a chronic ache in my neck from hunching over my sewing machine late into the night. The boys never knew how close we came to losing everything. They never knew about the nights I sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, trying to perform mathematical miracles that would stretch our grocery money to cover the electric bill. They never knew that their mother sometimes went 2 days without eating, so there would be enough food for growing boys who seemed to consume everything in sight. When Jake needed glasses in 3rd grade, I sold my wedding ring to pay for them. It wasn't worth much. Michael had been young and broke when he proposed, but it was enough to cover the eye exam and frames. I told the boys I was having it cleaned when they asked where it was. I never mentioned that I'd traded my last tangible connection to their father for the ability to help Jake see the blackboard clearly. When Ryan broke his arm falling off his bike that same year, I worked extra shifts for 3 months to pay the portion of the medical bills that our minimal insurance didn't cover. The diner manager let me pick up hours during the breakfast rush, which meant leaving the apartment at 4:30 in the morning and not returning until after the boys were asleep. Mrs. Chen from next door watched them for free in the mornings, but I could see the strain in her eyes, the way she calculated whether she could afford to keep helping us. Every sacrifice felt necessary at the time, but looking back, I wonder if I taught them that love meant giving everything of yourself until there was nothing left. I wonder if my constant selflessness inadvertently taught them that their mother's needs were always secondary, always negotiable, always something that could be postponed indefinitely. The Christmas when they were 12 stands out in my memory with painful clarity. I had been saving for months, putting aside $5 or $10 whenever possible, dreaming of the morning when they would find bicycles under our scraggly tree. But the furnace broke in November, and Chicago winters don't negotiate with single mothers trying to keep their children warm. The repair cost exactly what I had saved for Christmas presents. So I spent December evenings after work creating gifts from nothing. I knitted scarves from yarn I bought at the thrift store, stitching love into every row even though my hands cramped from the cold apartment. I baked cookies and packaged them in decorated coffee cans, trying to make frugality look festive. I wrote them each long letters about how proud I was of the young men they were becoming, how their father would have been amazed by their kindness and intelligence. Christmas morning, I watched their faces as they opened homemade gifts while other children in the neighborhood showed off expensive toys and gadgets. Jake smiled and said the scarf was nice, but I saw him glance toward the window where he could see Tommy Peterson across the street riding a brand new 10-speed bike. Ryan hugged me and thanked me for the cookies, but his enthusiasm felt forced, polite rather than genuine. I told myself that handmade gifts were more meaningful, that the love I poured into every stitch was worth more than anything money could buy. But 12-year-old boys don't understand the economics of sacrifice. They only understand that their friends had things they didn't, and their mother couldn't change that reality no matter how hard she worked or how much she loved them. High school brought new challenges and deeper financial strain. Both boys were smart. Honor roll students who qualified for advanced classes and college preparatory programs. But intelligence didn't make their sneakers any less worn or their jeans any less patched. It didn't change the fact that they carried bag lunches to school while their classmates bought hot meals, or that they walked home while other kids got picked up in their parents' cars. Jake developed an interest in photography during his sophomore year, spending hours in the school darkroom learning to develop film and print pictures. When he mentioned wanting to take a summer photography workshop at the community college, I started picking up extra shifts immediately. The workshop cost $200, a fortune to us, but I was determined to find a way. I worked breakfast, lunch, and dinner shifts at the diner for 6 weeks straight, My feet swelled so badly that I had to sleep with them elevated on pillows. My back ached constantly from carrying heavy trays and standing for 14 hours a day. But when I handed Jake the workshop registration money, his face lit up with genuine joy for the first time in months. "Really, Mom? I can go?" His voice cracked with adolescent excitement, mixed with disbelief that we could afford something so luxurious. "Of course you can go," I said, not mentioning that I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for 3 weeks to save money, or that I'd been walking to work instead of taking the bus. "You're talented, and talent should be nurtured." Ryan wanted to join the debate team his junior year, but it required traveling to competitions in other cities. The transportation and overnight expenses seemed impossible until I started cleaning office buildings on weekends, spending Saturdays and Sundays scrubbing corporate bathrooms and emptying trash cans while other mothers were attending their children's sports games or relaxing at home. I never told them about the second and third jobs. I never explained why I was always exhausted, why my hands were always red and chapped, why I fell asleep in my chair most evenings before 9 o'clock. I wanted them to focus on their studies and their dreams, not worry about the cost of their opportunities. But somewhere along the way, my constant giving created an expectation rather than gratitude. They began to assume that whatever they needed would somehow materialize, that their mother would figure out a way to make things work. They stopped asking how much things cost or whether we could afford them. They simply wanted, and I found ways to provide. When college acceptance letters arrived, I was proud and terrified in equal measure. Both boys had been accepted to good universities with partial scholarships, but partial scholarships still left thousands of dollars in gaps that needed to be filled. I took out loans I knew I'd never be able to repay, mortgaging my future to fund theirs. Jake majored in business with a minor in photography. Ryan studied law. Both were smart, ambitious young men with bright futures ahead of them. I attended their graduations with tears of pride streaming down my face, wearing the same dress I'd owned for 5 years because new clothes for myself seemed frivolous when they needed textbooks and dorm supplies. After college, they moved to different cities for careers and new lives. Jake settled in Denver, working for a marketing firm and eventually starting his own business. Ryan went to Milwaukee, joining a law practice and quickly earning a reputation as a sharp, successful attorney. They both married accomplished women who came from families with money, who had never worried about choosing between electricity and groceries. Their wives were lovely, educated women who spoke about things like investment portfolios and vacation properties with casual familiarity. When I met them at the boys' weddings, I felt like an imposter in my borrowed dress and discount store shoes, trying to make conversation about lives I couldn't comprehend. "Mrs. Harper, Jake tells us you worked so hard to put him through school," his wife Sarah said during the rehearsal dinner, her voice carrying the kind of admiration that somehow felt condescending. "That must have been such a challenge for you." A challenge. As if 30 years of sacrifice and sleepless nights and skipped meals could be summarized as a challenge, like completing a crossword puzzle or learning to use a computer. "It was worth it," I replied, because what else could I say? That I was still paying off their college loans, that my retirement account was empty because every spare dollar had gone to their futures, that I was proud but also broken, financially and emotionally depleted by decades of giving everything I had. The distance between us grew gradually after their marriages. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Holiday visits turned into brief, obligatory stops between more important commitments. When grandchildren were born, I became Grandma Evelyn, rather than just Grandma, a formal title that maintained proper distance rather than the warm intimacy I had dreamed of sharing with my son's children. And through it all, I kept playing my lottery numbers, those 6 digits that connected me to the family I had built and loved and lost in increments so small I hadn't noticed until it was too late to change the trajectory. Every week, I folded that worn piece of paper and handed over my dollar, buying hope when hope was all I could afford. Was I used? The question echoed in my mind as I approached Murphy's store, haunting me with its terrible possibility. Murphy's corner store felt different today, though nothing had actually changed. The same faded lottery posters hung on the windows, promising dreams that never seemed to materialize for people like me. The same bell chimed as I pushed through the glass door, announcing my arrival to Mr. Murphy. who looked up from his newspaper with the weary smile of a man who'd been selling hope for 40 years. The usual Mrs. Harper? He asked, already reaching for the lottery terminal before I could answer. I nodded and handed him my crumpled dollar bill, watching as he printed the ticket with my sacred numbers. But as I walked home, something gnawed at me. Jake's casual dismissal of our Sunday dinner felt different this time. Heavier somehow. Weighted with years of accumulated slights that I'd been too desperate for their love to acknowledge. Last month, it had been my birthday. 79 years old, and I'd spent the day alone in my apartment, checking my phone every few minutes like a teenager waiting for a text from a crush. Jake finally called at 9:30 that night, his voice rushed and distracted. "Sorry, Mom. Crazy day at work. Happy birthday. We'll definitely see you soon, okay?" He'd hung up before I could respond. Ryan never called at all, though he sent a generic text message the next day. "Happy belated birthday, Mom. Hope it was great. Hope it was great." I'd spent the entire day in silence, eating a piece of toast for lunch because I couldn't bring myself to cook a meal just for myself. The grocery store cake I'd bought sat untouched on my counter for 3 days before I finally threw it away. The cheerful yellow frosting roses wilting like my expectations. But it was the small moments that hurt the most, the casual cruelties disguised as busy lives and legitimate priorities. 2 weeks ago, I'd fallen in my bathroom, hitting my head on the corner of the sink. The cut wasn't deep, but it bled enough to scare me, and the dizziness that followed sent me to the emergency room in an ambulance. I spent 6 hours in the hospital, getting stitches and tests to make sure I didn't have a concussion. I called both boys from the hospital, leaving voicemails because neither answered their phones. "Hi, honey. It's Mom. I'm at Northwestern Memorial. I had a little fall, but I'm okay. Just wanted you to know in case, well, just in case." Jake called back 3 days later. "Mom, sorry I missed your call. Everything okay?" When I explained about the fall, the hospital visit, the stitches that were still tender on my forehead, he listened with the polite attention of someone hearing about a stranger's medical issues. "That's scary, Mom. Glad you're okay. Maybe you should think about one of those alert buttons for elderly people." Elderly people. As if I were some generic old woman rather than the mother who'd raised him. The woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion to pay for his college education and wedding expenses. Ryan's response was even worse. He texted, "Sorry about your fall, Mom. Be more careful. Talk soon. Be more careful." As if I'd deliberately thrown myself against the bathroom sink for attention. Neither of them visited. Neither offered to help with grocery shopping while I recovered. Neither seemed to understand that when you're 79 and live alone, a fall isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's a glimpse of your future vulnerability, a reminder that you're one accident away from complete helplessness. But the worst part wasn't their absence during my crisis. The worst part was discovering, quite by accident, how they really saw me. It happened 3 weeks after the fall, when I was finally feeling steady enough to venture out for groceries. I'd stopped at the small cafe next to the supermarket for coffee, treating myself to a luxury I rarely afforded. The Wi-Fi was free there, and I'd brought my old tablet to check my email, hoping against hope that one of my sons might have sent a real message, something beyond the perfunctory texts that had become our primary form of communication. I was struggling with the tablet. Technology had never been my strong suit, when I heard familiar laughter from the booth behind me. My heart jumped with joy before my brain could process what I was hearing. Jake's voice, clear and amused. "I swear, dealing with Mom is like managing a child sometimes. Did I tell you about the lottery thing?" I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips, straining to hear over the cafe's background noise. "She's been playing the same numbers for 30 years, Jake continued, his voice carrying the incredulous tone of someone sharing an amusing anecdote about a relative's harmless delusion. "The same exact numbers every single week. She actually thinks she's going to win someday." A woman's voice, Sarah, his wife, laughed in response. "That's kind of sweet, though. Gives her something to look forward to." "Sweet?" Jake's laughter was sharp, cutting. "It's pathetic. She's throwing away money she can't afford on a fantasy. But try explaining odds to someone who still writes checks instead of using a debit card." My hands began to tremble, and I gripped the coffee cup tighter to stop them from shaking visibly. Ryan's voice joined the conversation. At least it keeps her busy. Remember when she used to call every day? Thank God she's got her little lottery ritual to occupy her time. God, yes, Jake agreed. Remember how she used to want us to visit every weekend? Like we didn't have our own lives to live. Sarah's voice again, trying to inject some kindness into the conversation. She just misses you guys. It must be lonely. She chose to stay in that apartment, Ryan interrupted. We've told her she could move closer to one of us, but she insists on staying in Chicago. Then she complains about being alone. I felt something crack inside my chest, like ice breaking under sudden pressure. They'd never told me I could move closer. In fact, the few times I'd mentioned feeling isolated, they'd suggested I should get out more or make friends, as if loneliness were a character flaw I could overcome through better time management. And the guilt trips, Jake continued. Every conversation somehow becomes about how hard her life was, how much she sacrificed. We get it, Mom. You worked hard. But that was your choice. We didn't ask you to work 3 jobs. We didn't ask you to work 3 jobs. The words hit me like physical blows. I thought about all those nights I'd come home exhausted, falling asleep in my clothes because I was too tired to change into pajamas. I remembered the morning I'd worked a double shift at the diner, then cleaned the Peterson family's house, then stayed up until 2 a.m. hemming Ryan's pants for the school play because we couldn't afford to have them professionally altered. I hadn't worked 3 jobs because I enjoyed it. I'd worked 3 jobs because it was the only way to keep food on the table, and shoes on their feet, and dreams alive in their hearts. She acts like we owe her something, Ryan added. Like we're supposed to center our lives around her just because she's our mother. The thing is, Jake's voice dropped to a more confidential tone, I think she expects us to take care of her when she gets older. Like financially, I mean. Sarah and I were talking about it, and we're not sure we can handle that kind of responsibility. Same here, Ryan agreed. Madison and I are already stretched thin with the kids' college funds and the new house. Mom's going to have to figure out her own retirement situation. Her own retirement situation. I stared into my coffee, watching the cream swirl in patterns that blurred as my eyes filled with tears. They were discussing my future financial security like a business problem they hoped to avoid, strategizing ways to minimize their obligations to the woman who'd sacrificed her own retirement planning to fund their educations. The lottery thing is actually perfect, Jake continued with a laugh. It keeps her distracted from reality. As long as she thinks she might win big someday, she won't pressure us to help out. I sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might give away my presence. My sons were 10 feet away, dissecting my life with clinical detachment, reducing 30 years of motherhood to a series of inconveniences and obligations they resented. Should we feel guilty about this? Sarah asked, her voice uncertain. Guilty about what? Jake replied. About having our own lives? About not wanting to be responsible for someone else's poor financial planning? She's an adult, Sarah. She made her choices. Poor financial planning. As if choosing to feed your children instead of contributing to a 401k was a character flaw. As if working multiple minimum wage jobs left room for investment strategies and retirement portfolios. I listened for another 10 minutes as they moved on to other topics. Their vacation plans, their children's soccer schedules, a new restaurant they wanted to try. Normal family conversation, the kind I'd imagined having with them someday when they had time for their mother to be included in their lives. But I wasn't included. I was a problem they were managing, a responsibility they were trying to minimize, a burden they hoped to avoid through my own delusions about lottery winnings. When they finally left the cafe, laughing and planning their weekend while I remained hidden in my booth, I sat alone for another hour, staring at my cold coffee and trying to process what I'd learned. Everything I'd believed about our relationship was a lie I'd constructed to protect myself from this truth. They didn't just take my love for granted. They resented it. They saw my sacrifices as manipulation, my loneliness as emotional blackmail, my dreams as evidence of mental decline. I walked home in a daze, my grocery shopping forgotten. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in as I replayed their words in my mind. The photographs lining my hallway, all those proud moments at graduations and weddings and holiday celebrations, now looked like evidence of my own pathetic desperation to matter in lives that had moved on without me. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I opened the wooden box that held my lottery numbers and stared at them for a long time. 7 for Jake's birthday, 14 for Ryan's. The other numbers tied to memories of a marriage and a family that had felt meaningful at the time, but now seemed like elaborate self-deception. For the first time in 30 years, I considered not playing the lottery that week. What was the point of maintaining hope when hope was exactly what my sons found most pathetic about me? But as I sat there in my recliner, something else stirred inside me alongside the pain, something that felt almost like anger, though I'd trained myself for so many years not to feel anger toward my children that I barely recognized it. They thought my dreams were foolish. They found my love burdensome. They wanted me to disappear quietly into old age, requiring nothing from them except the occasional phone call to ease their minimal guilt. I folded the lottery numbers carefully and placed them back in the box. Tomorrow, I would buy my ticket as I had every week for 3 decades. Not because I believed it would change anything, but because it was the one thing in my life that belonged completely to me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, finally allowing myself to ask the question I'd been avoiding. Was I used? And for the first time since my husband died 48 years ago, I knew the answer was yes. 3 days after overhearing that devastating conversation at the cafe, something shifted inside me. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, more like a tectonic plate finally moving after years of pressure building beneath the surface. I woke up Wednesday morning and, for the first time in months, I didn't immediately check my phone for messages that never came. Instead, I made myself a proper breakfast. Not just instant coffee and toast, but actual eggs scrambled with cheese I'd been saving for a special occasion that never arrived. I ate slowly, tasting each bite, sitting at my small kitchen table instead of standing at the counter like I usually did, as if even my own meals weren't worth the dignity of sitting down. After breakfast, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to my volunteer work at the community center. It wasn't exactly lying. My heart was sick, my spirit was wounded, and I needed time to figure out what came next. For 30 years, I'd structured my life around being available for my sons. I kept my schedule light in case they needed something. I saved my modest resources in case they had emergencies. I maintained my phone like a lifeline, always charged, always within reach, always ready for the call that might reconnect us. But that Wednesday, I turned my phone off completely. The silence was terrifying at first. Without the constant low-level anxiety of waiting for contact, without the background hope that today might be the day one of them remembered I existed beyond their scheduled obligation calls, I felt unmoored. Who was Evelyn Harper if not a mother waiting for her children to need her? I spent the morning rearranging my living room, moving furniture that had sat in the same positions for years. The couch went under the window so I could watch the street life instead of staring at the television. The bookshelf moved next to my reading chair, making my small collection of novels more accessible. Small changes, but they felt revolutionary. When I finally turned my phone back on Thursday evening, there were 7 missed calls from Jake and 4 from Ryan. My heart jumped with its old reflex. Something must be wrong. They needed me. But as I listened to their increasingly frantic voicemails, a different picture emerged. Jake's first message, left Wednesday afternoon. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Call me back when you get this." His second message, Wednesday evening. "Mom, I tried calling earlier. Everything okay? It's not like you to not answer your phone." The third message, Thursday morning. "Mom, I'm starting to worry. Please call me back as soon as you get this message. I'm wondering if something happened." By the 7th message, his voice carried an edge of panic I'd never heard before. "Mom, if I don't hear from you by tomorrow morning, I'm driving up to Chicago to check on you. Please call me back." Ryan's messages followed a similar progression, starting casual and escalating to genuine alarm. It struck me as deeply ironic that the first time in months my sons had shown real concern for my welfare was when I'd stopped being available to them. When I'd existed in predictable silence, grateful for their minimal attention, they'd barely acknowledged my existence. But 12 hours of being unreachable had transformed me from a burden to an emergency. I called Jake back first, deliberately waiting until I knew he'd be getting ready for bed, when the disruption would be most inconvenient. "Mom!" he answered on the first ring, his voice flooding with relief. "Thank God! Where have you been? I've been calling you for 2 days." "I've been here," I said calmly. "I just needed some quiet time." "Quiet time?" His relief was already shifting to irritation. "Mom, you can't just disappear like that. We were worried sick. I was ready to drive to Chicago tomorrow to make sure you were okay." "Were you?" I thought. "When was the last time you drove to Chicago to see me when you weren't worried I was dead?" "I'm fine, Jake. I just turned my phone off for a day. People used to do that all the time, before cell phones existed. But Mom, what if there had been an emergency? What if we needed to reach you? What if you needed to reach me? Not what if I'd needed to reach them. What if they'd needed something from me and I'd been unavailable to provide it?" "What kind of emergency?" I asked, genuinely curious. "When was the last time you needed to reach me for something urgent?" There was a long pause. "That's not the point, Mom. You can't just go radio silent like that. It's not normal." Not normal. For months, they'd gone days without contacting me, and that was perfectly normal. But me taking 1 day of silence for myself was cause for emergency action. "I'll try to give you more notice next time," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Next time? Mom, there shouldn't be a next time. What's going on with you? You're acting strange." Strange. As if maintaining my own autonomy was a concerning symptom rather than a healthy choice. "I'm fine, Jake. Just tired." "Tired of what?" The question hung in the air between us. Tired of what? Tired of being taken for granted. Tired of loving people who found my love burdensome. Tired of hoping for phone calls that brought duty instead of joy. Tired of being grateful for scraps of attention from the people I'd given everything to create. "Just tired," I repeated. "I should let you get some sleep." "Wait, Mom, are you sure you're okay? You sound different." "Different?" Yes, I suppose I was different. For the first time in decades, I wasn't frantically trying to be worthy of their attention. I wasn't performing gratitude for their minimal effort. I wasn't pretending that their casual cruelty was normal family dynamics. "I'm the same as I've always been, honey. Get some rest." I hung up before he could respond, and for the first time in years, I didn't immediately regret asserting a boundary. Ryan called 10 minutes later. "Mom, Jake said you're acting weird." "What's going on?" "Acting weird." They'd already discussed me, compared notes, decided something was wrong with their mother because she'd taken 1 day away from being constantly available for their non-existent needs. "Nothing's going on, Ryan. I'm just fine." "You sure? Because turning off your phone for a whole day, that's not like you." He was right. It wasn't like me. The old me would never have risked missing a call from one of my precious boys. The old me would have apologized profusely for causing them worry, would have promised never to be so inconsiderate again. But I was discovering that the old me had been slowly killing herself through death by 1,000 small sacrifices, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be her anymore. "Maybe I'm changing," I said simply. "Changing how?" "Mom, you're scaring us." Scaring them. 24 hours of not being instantly available, and they were scared. Not concerned for my well-being, but scared of what my unavailability might mean for them. "There's nothing to be scared of, Ryan. I'm just taking better care of myself." "What does that mean exactly?" It meant I wasn't going to spend my remaining years waiting by the phone for scraps of attention. It meant I wasn't going to apologize for existing. It meant I wasn't going to pretend their neglect was acceptable just to maintain the illusion of family harmony. But I couldn't say any of that without starting a conversation I wasn't ready to have. "It means I'm learning to enjoy my own company," I said instead. "Mom, that sounds lonely." Lonely. I almost laughed. I'd been desperately lonely for years while surrounded by family who treated me like a burdensome obligation. Now, choosing solitude felt like the first honest relationship I'd had in decades. "I'm okay with lonely," I said. "Sometimes lonely is better than wishing you mattered to people who've made it clear you don't." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Ryan's discomfort through the phone, his struggle to process this unprecedented honesty from his perpetually accommodating mother. "Mom, what do you mean by that?" What did I mean? I meant that I'd spent 30 years trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I meant that I'd sacrificed my own financial security, my own dreams, my own sense of self-worth to raise two men who now discussed me like a management problem. I meant that I was finally admitting I'd been throwing good love after bad for longer than I cared to calculate. I mean, I'm tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not, I said quietly. What's not fine? Mom, if something's bothering you, we can talk about it. Could we? When was the last time either of them had asked about my feelings, my hopes, my fears? When had they ever created space for me to be anything other than endlessly grateful for their minimal presence in my life? When? I asked. When can we talk about it? When you have time in your schedule for something other than a 5-minute phone call to check a box. Another long silence. That's not fair, Mom. We're busy, but we care about you. I know you're busy, I said. Everyone's busy. But caring about someone means making time for them, doesn't it? It means showing interest in their life beyond whether they're still breathing. We show interest. When? When do you show interest? When was the last time either of you asked me about anything other than my health? When was the last time you wanted to know what I was reading, or thinking about, or hoping for? The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. I don't know, Ryan finally admitted, his voice smaller than before. I know you don't know, I said gently, and that's what's not fine. So, what do you want us to do? What would make this better? What would make it better? I wanted to matter to them the way they mattered to me. I wanted them to think of me with warmth instead of obligation. I wanted them to visit because they missed me, not because their wives reminded them it had been too long. I wanted them to call because they were curious about my thoughts, not because they felt guilty about the last time they'd forgotten to call. But you can't ask someone to love you differently. You can't demand genuine affection or negotiate authentic interest. All you can do is stop accepting substitutes for the real thing. I don't want you to do anything, I said finally. I just want to stop pretending that what we have is enough for me. Mom, I love you both, I continued, and my voice remained steady despite the tears I could feel building. I will always love you, but I'm done organizing my life around people who find my existence inconvenient. We don't find you inconvenient, don't you? I asked quietly. Don't you really? The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore, but equally impossible to answer honestly without confirming what we both knew was true. I need to go, Ryan said finally. But Mom, this conversation isn't over. Yes, I said as I prepared to hang up. I think it is. But I was wrong. The conversation was just beginning, and it would change everything. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I woke up before my alarm for the first time in months, not because I was anxious, but because I felt rested, really rested. The kind of deep sleep that comes when you stop carrying other people's expectations to bed with you every night. I made coffee in my favorite mug and sat by the window, watching the morning commuters hurry past on their way to jobs and responsibilities. For years, I'd watched that same scene while mentally preparing for my own day of structured obligations. Volunteer work that filled time but not purpose, errands designed to make me useful, phone calls scheduled around other people's convenience. But today was different. Today, I had nowhere to be except exactly where I was. The decision crystallized as I finished my coffee. For 30 years, I'd been living on autopilot, my choices dictated by what others needed from me rather than what I wanted for myself. Today, I would make my first purely selfish decision in decades. I was going to buy my lottery ticket early, and then I was going to spend an entire day doing whatever I wanted, without asking permission or feeling guilty or explaining myself to anyone. The walk to Murphy's store felt different in the morning light. Instead of my usual hurried, purposeful stride, I found myself meandering, actually looking at the neighborhood I'd lived in for years without really seeing. Mrs. Patterson was tending her garden, coaxing the last blooms from her chrysanthemums before winter claimed them. Mr. Johnson was washing his car in his driveway, humming something that sounded like old Motown. These were my neighbors, people I'd passed thousands of times while rushing to fulfill obligations that had consumed my life. When was the last time I'd stopped to actually talk to any of them? "Morning, Mrs. Harper," Mrs. Patterson called out, looking up from her flowers. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I paused, really looking at her for the first time in years. She was probably close to my age, with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and dirt under her fingernails from working in the soil. Her face was lined but peaceful, carrying the contentment of someone who'd found joy in simple pleasures. "It really is," I replied, walking over to the low fence that separated her yard from the sidewalk. "Your flowers are beautiful. You must spend a lot of time on them." She beamed with the pride of someone whose efforts had been acknowledged. "Oh, I do. People think I'm crazy, planting new things at my age. But I figure if I'm going to be here, I might as well make it pretty. If I'm going to be here, I might as well make it pretty." Such a simple philosophy, but it hit me like a revelation. I'd been so focused on surviving my circumstances that I'd forgotten I could improve them. "Do you think—" I hesitated, then pushed forward. "Do you think you could teach me sometime? About gardening? I've always wanted to try, but I never seem to have the time." "Time?" She laughed, but not unkindly. "Honey, at our age, time is the one thing we've got plenty of. What we don't have is unlimited tomorrows. Come by any time. I'd love the company." Company. When was the last time someone had genuinely wanted my company? Not because they needed something from me, but because they enjoyed being around me. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. I'd really like that. At Murphy's store, I bought my lottery ticket with my sacred numbers. But for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel desperate about it. The hope was still there, but it felt lighter somehow, less weighted with the crushing need for external salvation. "You seem cheerful today, Mrs. Harper," Mr. Murphy observed as he handed me the ticket. "Good news?" "I'm having a good day," I said simply. Maybe the best day I've had in a long time. Instead of going straight home, I made another impulsive decision. I walked to the public library, a beautiful brick building I'd passed countless times, but hadn't entered in years. Inside, the smell of books and the quiet murmur of people pursuing their own interests felt like stepping into a sanctuary. I'd always loved to read, but somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that reading for pleasure was frivolous, selfish, a waste of time I should be spending on more productive activities. When had I stopped believing that my own entertainment and education mattered? I wandered through the fiction section, running my fingers along book spines like I was greeting old friends. Romance novels I'd denied myself because they seemed silly. Mysteries I'd avoided because they weren't important enough. Travel memoirs that had seemed pointless when I couldn't afford to travel myself. I selected 3 books. A romance set in Ireland, a mystery featuring an elderly amateur detective, and a memoir by a woman who'd traveled across Europe alone in her 70s. An hour's worth of reading for someone with unlimited time and no one to answer to. The librarian, a young woman with kind eyes and purple streaks in her hair, smiled as she checked out my books. "Great choices. Are you new to the area?" "No, I've lived here for years," I admitted. "I just haven't made time for reading lately." "Well, welcome back," she said warmly. "We're open until 9 most nights if you ever want a quiet place to read. And we have a book club for folks over 60 that meets every other Thursday. Very casual, very friendly. A book club. People my age gathering to discuss books, sharing thoughts and opinions about stories that mattered to them. When had I last been part of a group where my thoughts were valued, where my presence was welcome rather than tolerated? "I might be interested in that," I said, tucking the information pamphlet into my purse alongside my library books. From the library, I walked to Lincoln Park, the sprawling green space I'd driven past hundreds of times but never visited. It was a gorgeous autumn day, the kind of weather that makes Chicago bearable, and the park was alive with people enjoying their Friday afternoon freedom. I found an empty bench near the lake and settled in with my Irish romance novel. The story was pure escapism. A young woman inheriting a cottage in County Cork and falling in love with the brooding local veterinarian. But it was exactly what my soul needed. Pure, uncomplicated pleasure with no deeper purpose than entertainment. I read for 2 hours, completely absorbed in someone else's happily ever after. And for those 2 hours, I forgot to check my phone, forgot to worry about whether my sons were trying to reach me, forgot to feel guilty about wasting time on something that served no one but myself. When I finally looked up from the book, the afternoon sun was slanting through the trees, creating patterns of light and shadow that looked like nature's own stained glass windows. Families were scattered across the grass, parents pushing children on swings, teenagers playing frisbee, elderly couples walking hand in hand along the lake shore. I watched them all with a strange sense of detachment. For so many years, I'd looked at family scenes like these with desperate longing, imagining the day when my sons would bring their children to play while I watched proudly from the sidelines. But now, sitting alone on my bench with my book in my lap, I felt something I hadn't expected: contentment. I didn't need to be part of those family scenes to appreciate their beauty. I didn't need to be surrounded by loved ones to feel worthy of a beautiful afternoon in the park. I could simply exist in this moment, this place, this perfectly ordinary day, and find it enough. My phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, I reached for it, my old reflexes still strong. But then I stopped, my hand hovering over the device. For 30 years, I'd been instantly available to my sons, dropping whatever I was doing to respond to their needs or wants. Reading their messages had always taken priority over my own activities. Their schedule had always trumped my plans. Their convenience had always mattered more than my peace. But I was reading a good book on a beautiful day in a place that made me feel calm and happy. Whatever they wanted could wait an hour, or 2 hours, or until I finished this chapter and decided I was ready to rejoin the world of other people's demands. I left the phone in my purse and returned to my book. When I finally made it home around dinner time, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not the artificial lightness of denial or distraction, but the genuine ease that comes from spending an entire day pleasing no one but yourself. I cooked myself a real dinner. Not the hasty sandwiches and canned soup I usually subsisted on, but actual chicken breast with roasted vegetables and rice. I set my small dining table with my good china, the dishes I'd been saving for special occasions that never came. I lit a candle and opened a bottle of wine I'd received as a Christmas gift and never felt worthy of drinking. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, reading my mystery novel between courses. The elderly detective was investigating a murder at a retirement community, and I found myself laughing out loud at her sharp observations about aging and invisibility. When had I last laughed alone, genuinely amused by something that had nothing to do with pleasing other people? After dinner, I poured myself a second glass of wine and called Mrs. Patterson. I was serious about the gardening lessons, I told her. Would tomorrow morning work? I could bring coffee and pastries from that bakery on Ashland. That sounds wonderful, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I'll show you how to plant bulbs for spring. It's the perfect time of year for it. Planting bulbs for spring? Investing in a future I would be here to see, in beauty I would create and tend and enjoy. The concept felt revolutionary. After we hung up, I finally checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Jake, 2 from Ryan, and a series of increasingly concerned text messages. Jake: Mom, just checking in. Call me when you get this. Ryan: haven't heard from you today. Everything okay? Jake: Mom, it's been all day. Please call me back. Ryan: getting worried. Are you going to make this a regular thing? Jake: if I don't hear from you by tonight, I'm calling the police to do a wellness check. I stared at that last message for a long time. A wellness check. Because I'd spent one day living my life without providing them constant access to my availability. I called Jake back, but this time I didn't feel guilty about the delay. Mom, Jesus, where have you been? I was about to call the cops. I was at the park, I said calmly, reading a book. Then I came home and made dinner. You were at the park? All day? Not all day. I went to the library first, then the park, then home. It was a lovely day. You went to the library? Mom, what's going on with you? This isn't normal behavior. There was that word again. Normal. As if a 79-year-old woman spending a day reading and enjoying nature was cause for psychiatric intervention. What's not normal about going to the library? You never go to the library. You never go to parks. You never just disappear for an entire day without telling anyone where you're going. He was right. I never did those things. I'd spent 30 years being predictable, available, grateful for scraps of attention. But predictable wasn't the same as healthy, and available wasn't the same as valued. Maybe I'm trying new things. I said. New things? Mom, you're 79 years old. People your age don't just start trying new things. People your age. As if I'd reached some expiration date for growth, learning, change, joy. As if being 79 meant I was supposed to sit quietly in my apartment, waiting to die while being grateful for occasional phone calls from children who found my continued existence inconvenient. Why not? I asked. Who made that rule? It's concerning, okay? First you go radio silent for a day, now you're wandering around Chicago alone, going to places you never go. It's like you're having some kind of breakdown. A breakdown. Or maybe a breakthrough. Maybe I was finally breaking through 30 years of accepting less than I deserved, of being grateful for crumbs when I'd been serving full meals. I'm not having a breakdown, Jake. I'm having a good day. Maybe my first genuinely good day in years. A good day? Mom, you sound different. You sound, I don't know, distant. Distant. Yes. I suppose I was becoming distant from the version of myself that had been slowly suffocating under the weight of unreciprocated love and endless availability. I'm exactly where I need to be, I said. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. That night, I slept deeply again, and I dreamed of spring flowers blooming in soil I'd prepared with my own hands. Sunday arrived with an unexpected phone call at 7 in the morning. I was in my kitchen, grinding coffee beans I'd splurged on at the farmer's market, another small rebellion against a lifetime of instant coffee and apologetic frugality, when my phone rang with Jake's distinctive ringtone, 7 a.m. on a Sunday. In 30 years, Jake had never called me before 10 on a weekend, respecting what he called his family time with Sarah and the kids. The early hour sent a jolt of alarm through me before I remembered. I was no longer responsible for managing other people's emotions or anticipating their crises. Good morning, Jake, I answered, my voice steady despite the unusual timing. Mom, we need to talk. Ryan and I are driving up to Chicago today. We'll be there around noon. Not, can we come see you? Or, would it be convenient if we visited? Just a statement of intention, delivered with the assumption that my Sunday would naturally reorganize itself around their agenda. Oh? I said, pouring hot water over my coffee grounds and watching them bloom. Any particular reason? You know the reason, Mom. This whole thing you're doing, the disappearing acts, the weird behavior, the attitude. We're worried about you. The attitude. As if asserting basic boundaries and refusing to apologize for existing constituted a personality disorder requiring family intervention. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I'm doing quite well. In fact, I have plans today. Plans? The word carried the same incredulous tone he might use if I'd announced plans to climb Mount Everest. What kind of plans? Mrs. Patterson is teaching me to plant bulbs for spring. Then I'm meeting some people from the library's book club for coffee. The silence that followed was so complete I wondered if the call had dropped. You're gardening? With the neighbor? And joining a book club? Is that strange? Mom, yesterday you were reading in the park. Now you're gardening and joining social groups. This isn't like you at all. We're coming up to talk about this. We're coming up. As if I were a problem requiring joint management, a situation demanding their combined authority to resolve. Jake, I appreciate that you're concerned, but I don't need you to drive to Chicago to discuss my perfectly normal activities. Normal? His voice pitched higher with frustration. Mom, 3 weeks ago you could barely manage to leave your apartment except for groceries. Now you're gallivanting around the city, ignoring your phone, acting like you don't have a family who cares about you. Gallivanting. Acting like I don't have a family. The language was revealing. To them, my newfound independence wasn't growth or healing, but rebellion against my proper role as their perpetually available, eternally grateful mother. I do have a family, I said quietly. I'm just learning to have a life, too. What's that supposed to mean? What did it mean? It meant I was tired of existing solely as an extension of other people's lives. It meant I was discovering that 79 years old wasn't too late to remember who Evelyn Harper had been before she became Jake and Ryan's mother. It meant I was choosing to invest in relationships that nourished me rather than depleted me. It means I'm trying to build something for myself instead of waiting for other people to include me in their lives. We include you in our lives. Do you? I thought. When? During the obligatory 5-minute phone calls where you ask about my health but not my thoughts? During the canceled Sunday dinners that get rescheduled indefinitely? During the holidays when I'm invited as an afterthought and expected to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you can spare? We'll talk about it when you get here, I said instead. But Jake, I want you to understand something. I'm not going to apologize for being happy. Happy? Mom, you're not happy. You're having some kind of crisis. People don't just completely change their personality at 79. Maybe they do when they finally get tired of being invisible. Another long silence. Fine, he said finally. We'll be there at noon. And Mom, we're going to figure this out. Figure this out, as if I were a puzzle to be solved rather than a person to be understood. After he hung up, I sat with my coffee and considered my options. I could spend the morning preparing for their visit, cleaning the apartment, and rehearsing explanations for my newfound independence. I could arm myself with logic and evidence, building a case for why a 79-year-old woman should be allowed to read books and plant flowers without family intervention. Or I could go plant bulbs with Mrs. Patterson and let them wait. I chose the bulbs. Mrs. Patterson's backyard was a revelation. Neat rows of perennials preparing for winter dormancy, raised beds with rich, dark soil, and a small greenhouse where she started seeds and nurtured tender plants through harsh Chicago winters. She greeted me with genuine warmth and a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed by someone who understood that good coffee was a daily gift you gave yourself. I brought daffodil bulbs, she said, leading me to a sunny corner of the yard. They're perfect for beginners, practically indestructible, and they'll multiply every year. Plant them once. Enjoy them for decades. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, digging holes in the cool earth, placing each bulb with care and intention. My hands, soft from years of indoor living, grew dirty and slightly raw from the unfamiliar work, but there was something profoundly satisfying about the process. It's an act of faith. Planting bulbs, Mrs. Patterson said as we covered the last row with soil. You bury something ugly in the cold ground and trust that spring will bring something beautiful. An act of faith. I thought about that as we cleaned our tools and washed the soil from our hands. For 30 years, I'd been planting different kinds of bulbs. Sacrifices, compromises, endless availability, waiting for them to bloom into the love and appreciation I craved. But some bulbs never flower, no matter how much care you give them. Maybe it was time to plant something new. I was still thinking about bulbs and faith when I returned home at 11:30 to find Jake's silver sedan already parked outside my building. Through my apartment window, I could see 2 figures sitting in the car, and I realized they'd been waiting, watching for me to return like private investigators conducting surveillance. The old me would have hurried upstairs, apologetic for keeping them waiting, grateful that they'd taken time from their important lives to check on their troublesome mother. The new me took my time gathering my things, said goodbye to Mrs. Patterson with promises to help with winter garden preparations, and walked to my building at a pace that suited me rather than their schedule. They were both waiting in the lobby when I entered, Jake looking irritated and impatient, Ryan attempting his lawyer's mask of professional concern. They'd aged since I'd seen them last, I realized. Jake, now 44, had developed the soft look of a man who spent too much time behind a desk and not enough time moving his body. Ryan, 44 as well, wore the pinched expression of someone who carried constant stress in his shoulders and jaw. When had they stopped looking like my little boys and started looking like middle-aged strangers? Mom, Jake said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. We've been waiting for you. I can see that, I replied, unlocking the lobby door and heading for the elevator. You're early. We said noon. It's noon. I had plans until noon, I said, pressing the button for my floor. As I mentioned this morning, in the small elevator, the tension was thick enough to cut. Ryan kept glancing at Jake as if they'd rehearsed this conversation and were now waiting for the appropriate moment to begin their intervention. My apartment, when we entered it, looked different than it had a week ago. Not because I'd changed anything major, but because I'd started treating it like a home rather than a waiting room. Books from the library sat openly on my coffee table instead of being hidden away as frivolous. The good china from Friday's dinner was still in the dish drainer, evidence that I'd deemed myself worthy of my own nice things. Fresh flowers from the farmer's market brightened the kitchen windowsill. "Sit down," Jake said, settling into my recliner as if he owned it. "We need to talk." I remained standing, moving to the kitchen to put on water for tea. "Would you like coffee? Or tea?" "Mom, forget the drinks. We're here because we're worried about you." "I heard you the first time," I said, arranging cups on a tray with deliberate care. "But I'm still offering refreshments to my guests." "Guests?" Ryan's voice carried surprise and something that might have been hurt. "Mom, we're your sons." "You're also my guests," I replied. "You announced your intention to visit, drove up from your respective cities, and are now sitting in my home. That makes you guests." They exchanged glances again, and I could see them recalibrating their approach. "Fine," Jake said with exaggerated patience. "Coffee would be nice, thank you." I served them coffee in my good china, using the sugar bowl and cream pitcher that had been wedding gifts from my mother 48 years ago. I sat across from them in my kitchen chair, maintaining the physical distance that felt emotionally necessary. "Now," Jake began, setting down his cup with the air of someone calling a meeting to order, "we want to understand what's been going on with you lately." "What would you like to understand?" "This whole thing. The personality change, the secretive behavior, the way you're suddenly acting like you don't need your family." I considered his words carefully. "When have I acted like I don't need you? You turn off your phone. You disappear for hours without telling anyone where you're going. You're joining clubs and making friends like you're—" He struggled for words. "Like I'm what? Like you're starting over. Like your whole life before this doesn't matter." Starting over. The phrase hit me with unexpected force. Was that what I was doing? After 79 years of living for other people, was I finally starting to live for myself? "Maybe I am starting over," I said quietly. "Is that so terrible?" "Mom, you're 79 years old." Jake's voice rose with frustration. "People don't start over at 79. They settle into routines. They accept their limitations. They rely on their families for support and companionship. Whose rule is that? It's not a rule, it's natural. It's normal. Normal again. Their favorite word for anything that made them comfortable, that fit their expectations, that didn't require them to see me as anything other than a predictable, grateful, safely contained old woman. "What if I don't want to be normal?" I asked. Ryan leaned forward, switching to what I recognized as his professional counselor voice. "Mom, we understand that getting older can be difficult. The isolation, the sense that life is passing you by. These are common feelings among people your age." People your age. Another phrase that reduced me to a demographic rather than treating me as an individual with unique thoughts and desires. "But the solution isn't to reinvent yourself," he continued. "It's to find healthy ways to cope with the natural changes that come with aging." "And you think my current behavior is unhealthy?" "We think it's concerning," Jake interjected. "You've always been someone who values family, who makes us a priority in your life. Now suddenly you're acting like we don't matter." I stared at him for a long moment. This man who looked like my son but spoke like a stranger, and felt something crystallize inside my chest. "Jake," I said quietly, "when was the last time you made me a priority in your life?" "What do you mean?" "We call you. We check on you." "When was the last time you called me because you missed me, not because you felt obligated?" "That's not fair." "When was the last time you visited me because you wanted to spend time with me, not because you felt guilty about how long it had been?" "Mom, when was the last time either of you asked me about my thoughts, my dreams, my feelings about anything other than my health?" The silence that followed was deafening. "We care about you," Ryan said finally, his voice smaller than before. "I know you care about me," I replied. "But caring about someone and making them feel valued are different things. And I've spent 30 years feeling like an obligation rather than a joy." "That's not true," Jake protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" I stood up and walked to the kitchen drawer where I kept important papers. From it, I withdrew something I'd prepared that morning, knowing this conversation was inevitable. It was a single sheet of paper with handwritten dates and times. "This is a record of every phone call, text message, and visit I've received from both of you over the past 6 months," I said, placing it on the coffee table between us. They stared at the paper as if it were evidence in a criminal trial. 14 phone calls, I continued. Average length? 6 minutes. 12 text messages, mostly about scheduling or weather. 1 visit, the canceled Sunday dinner. Mom, we're busy. Everyone's busy, I interrupted. But people make time for what matters to them, and this tells me exactly where I rank in your priorities. You're our mother, Ryan said, his voice breaking slightly. Of course you matter to us. Do I? I asked gently. Or do I matter as an idea? As a responsibility? As something you're supposed to care about rather than something you actually want in your lives? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge they couldn't meet. I think, I said finally, it's time for you both to go. Mom, we can't just leave things like this. Yes, I said, walking to the door and opening it. You can, because this isn't your decision to make. This is my life, and for the first time in 30 years, I'm choosing to live it on my own terms. As they gathered their things in stunned silence, Jake turned back one last time. Mom, if you keep pushing us away, you're going to end up alone. I looked at this man I'd raised, this person I'd sacrificed everything to nurture and support, and felt a profound sadness for the relationship we'd never quite managed to build. Jake, I said softly, I've been alone for years. I'm just finally admitting it. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and for the first time in decades, the sound felt like freedom rather than abandonment. The Wednesday after my son's intervention attempt, I woke up with a strange lightness in my chest, as if someone had removed a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. The apartment felt larger somehow, filled with possibility rather than the suffocating silence of disappointment. I made my morning coffee with the good beans, sat at my kitchen table with my Irish romance novel, and for the first time in 30 years, didn't check my phone for messages that wouldn't come. Instead, I made a list, not of things I needed to do for other people, but of things I wanted to do for myself. Learn to paint, take a cooking class, visit the Art Institute, buy a plant that required actual care instead of surviving on neglect, maybe even travel somewhere. Travel. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like a language I'd once spoken but had forgotten through disuse. When was the last time I'd been anywhere other than the grocery store, the pharmacy, or the doctor's office? When had I last done something purely for the joy of discovery? I called Mrs. Patterson first. Good morning, dear, she answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the warmth that had become a bright spot in my days. How are your bulbs settling in? They're perfect, I said, though of course there was nothing to see yet but dark soil and hope. I was wondering, do you know anything about houseplants? I'd like to bring some life into my apartment. Oh, honey, I know everything about houseplants. I've got propagations growing all over my house. Why don't you come over this afternoon and I'll send you home with some babies that need new homes. Babies that needed new homes. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Maybe I was ready to nurture something that would actually grow under my care instead of pulling away from it. That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson's living room looked like a greenhouse had exploded. Plants cascaded from shelves, hung in macrame holders, and crowded every available surface. Pothos with heart-shaped leaves, spider plants sending out runners like desperate arms reaching for light, African violets clustered on a sunny windowsill like a purple constellation. This is incredible, I breathed, turning slowly to take it all in. How long have you been collecting them? Oh, about 15 years, she said, gently touching the leaves of a massive fiddle-leaf fig. Started after my Harold died. I needed something to care for, something that would respond to love and attention. Plants don't leave you, you know. They don't get busy with their own lives and forget you exist. The words hit me with gentle precision. Here was someone who understood what it meant to pour love into something and watch it flourish rather than fade away. This one, she said, leading me to a small pothos with variegated leaves, is perfect for beginners. Very forgiving, grows fast, tells you what it needs. And this, she indicated a trailing plant with delicate green and white leaves, is a wandering Jew, practically indestructible, and it'll fill whatever space you give it. I left her house with 6 small plants, detailed care instructions written in her careful handwriting, and an invitation to return any time I had questions or just wanted company among the greenery. Back in my apartment, I arranged my new plants like I was welcoming friends into my home. The pothos went on my kitchen windowsill where it could catch morning light. The wandering Jew found a place on my bookshelf where its trailing vines could cascade toward the floor. Each plant seemed to transform its corner of the apartment, adding life and possibility to spaces that had felt stagnant for years. Thursday morning brought my first book club meeting. I'd read the selected novel, a story about a woman who left her comfortable but unfulfilling life to open a bakery in France, and found myself taking notes in the margins, something I hadn't done since college. When had I stopped thinking critically about stories, stopped engaging with ideas beyond their entertainment value? The library's community room buzzed with conversation when I arrived. 12 women and 3 men, all over 60, sitting in a loose circle with well-worn books in their hands and opinions ready to share. The librarian with purple streaks, whose name I learned was Michelle, introduced me to the group with genuine enthusiasm. "Everyone, this is Evelyn. She's new to our little literary family." Literary family. The phrase warmed me in ways I hadn't expected. "What did you think of Marie's decision to leave everything behind?" asked a woman named Dorothy, her white hair cut in a stylish bob that spoke of someone who'd decided aging didn't mean surrendering style. "Some people thought it was incredibly selfish. I thought it was brave," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "Sometimes staying in a situation that's slowly killing your spirit is the real selfishness. Sometimes leaving is the most honest thing you can do." The discussion that followed was unlike any conversation I'd had in years. These people listened to each other, built on each other's ideas, disagreed respectfully, and treated every opinion as worthy of consideration. When I mentioned that Marie reminded me of myself, a woman discovering she was more than the roles others had assigned her, several heads nodded in understanding. "It's never too late to become who you were meant to be," said a man named Frank, his voice carrying the authority of lived experience. "I didn't start painting until I was 72. Now I can't imagine my life without it. I learned to swim at 68, added another woman. "My grandchildren taught me. Best thing I ever did." These people had stories of transformation, of choosing growth over resignation, of refusing to accept that their best years were behind them. For the first time in decades, I felt like I belonged somewhere not because of what I could provide, but because of who I was becoming. After the meeting, Dorothy invited me for coffee at the little cafe where I'd once overheard my sons discussing my pathetic lottery dreams. The same booth where they'd dissected my loneliness and planned to avoid their financial obligations to me. "You seem like someone who's in transition," Dorothy observed as we settled into our seats with steaming mugs. "There's an energy about you, like you're becoming rather than just being." Becoming. Yes, that was exactly what it felt like. Not changing, exactly, but uncovering something that had been buried under years of other people's expectations. "I think I'm finally learning to live for myself," I admitted. "It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time." "Oh, honey," Dorothy laughed, stirring sugar into her coffee with elegant movements. "Wait until you discover what you're actually capable of when you stop asking permission to exist." That evening, I did something I'd never done in my life. I enrolled in a class purely for my own enjoyment. The community college offered a beginning watercolor course on Tuesday nights, and the description promised exploration of light, color, and personal expression through paint. Personal expression. When had I last expressed anything personal beyond gratitude for whatever scraps of attention came my way? The first class met the following Tuesday in a bright room that smelled of turpentine and possibility. 15 students of various ages sat behind easels, staring at blank paper like it held the secrets of the universe. Our instructor, a woman in her 50s with paint-stained fingers and laugh lines around her eyes, talked about seeing light rather than objects, about painting what we felt rather than what we thought we should see. "Don't worry about making it look like anything," she said as we mixed our first colors. "Just let the paint tell you what wants to happen." My first painting was terrible by any conventional standard, a muddy landscape that looked like it had been created during an earthquake. But there was something in the process of moving color across paper, of making choices based purely on what pleased me in the moment, that felt like meditation and rebellion combined. "It's very emotional," the instructor said, pausing beside my easel. You can see the feeling in every brushstroke. Emotional. Yes, it was emotional. 30 years of suppressed creativity, of denied self-expression, of living so carefully that I'd forgotten what it felt like to make a mark on the world that was purely my own. I signed up for the intermediate class before I'd even finished cleaning my brushes. Friday brought another first, my own lottery ticket check. I'd been playing the same numbers for 30 years, but I'd always checked the results half-heartedly, without real hope or expectation. This time, I spread the newspaper across my kitchen table next to my Tuesday night painting and compared the numbers with genuine curiosity rather than desperate need. The first number matched, then the second, then the third. I blinked and checked again, certain I was misreading something, but there they were. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and 49. Every single one of my sacred numbers, the digits that connected me to my history and my heartbreak, staring back at me from the newspaper's lottery page. I sat perfectly still for a very long time, the newspaper trembling in my hands, trying to process what this meant. $2 million. $2 million. For 30 years, I'd dreamed of this moment. I'd imagined the phone calls I'd make, the people I'd help, the ways I'd use this windfall to finally earn the love and appreciation I'd been seeking. I'd pictured my sons' faces when they learned their lottery-obsessed mother had been right all along. But now, sitting in my plant-filled apartment with paint still under my fingernails and a book club meeting to look forward to next week, the money felt like something different than salvation. It felt like freedom, not freedom from loneliness. I was learning to enjoy my own company, not freedom from invisibility. I was discovering communities where I was seen and valued, not freedom from worthlessness. I was finally understanding that my worth had never depended on other people's recognition. This money was freedom to become whoever I wanted to be without apology, without compromise, without consideration for people who'd made it clear that my happiness was not their priority. I called the lottery office to begin the claim process, my voice steady and calm. Then I called Mrs. Patterson. "I have some news," I said when she answered. "Good news. And I was wondering if you'd like to celebrate with me." "Of course, dear. What are we celebrating?" I looked around my apartment, at my thriving plants, my library books, my terrible but beloved painting propped against the wall, the life I was building piece by careful piece, and smiled. "Freedom," I said. "We're celebrating freedom." That night, I sat in my garden chair on Mrs. Patterson's back porch, surrounded by the dormant bulbs we'd planted together, drinking wine and watching the sunset paint the Chicago sky in shades of gold and purple. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely present in my own existence, completely content with my own company, completely certain that I was exactly where I needed to be. The old Evelyn would have spent this evening planning how to share her windfall with children who'd never appreciated her sacrifices. The new Evelyn was planning something entirely different. I was planning to live. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the deck of my new cottage in Door County, Wisconsin, watching the sunset over Lake Michigan while my fingers trace the edges of a letter that arrived this morning. The return address reads, Jake Morrison, in handwriting I recognize from elementary school homework assignments I used to help check decades ago. The cottage is small but perfect. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that floods with morning light, and a garden where my spring bulbs have exploded into a riot of daffodils and tulips that nod in the lake breeze like they're greeting old friends. Mrs. Patterson helped me design the garden before I moved, and she visits every few weeks to see how everything is growing. Plants and friendships, she likes to say, both need the right conditions to flourish. The letter sits unopened on my wicker table next to a cup of tea that's grown cold while I've been lost in thought. I know what it contains. Jake and Ryan have been trying to reach me since the lottery story broke in the Chicago Tribune 3 months ago. Local grandmother wins $2 million, donates half to women's shelter, the headline had read, accompanied by a photo of me presenting an oversized check to the director of New Beginnings, a shelter for women escaping domestic violence. The reporter had asked why I'd chosen that particular charity, and I'd answered honestly, because sometimes the most courageous thing a woman can do is choose herself over people who don't value her. I hadn't mentioned my sons by name, but anyone who knew our story could read between the lines. My phone has been ringing regularly since then. Jake's voice in the voicemails has evolved from concerned to frustrated, to desperate to angry, and back to concerned in a cycle that would have broken my heart 6 months ago. Now it just makes me sad for him. Not the deep, aching sadness I used to carry for my own loneliness, but the gentle melancholy you feel for someone who's lost something precious and doesn't understand how it slipped away. "Mom, we need to talk," his most recent message had said. "I know you're angry with us, but this isn't the way to handle it. We're your family. We love you. Please call me back." We love you. Past tense disguised as present tense. Obligation disguised as affection. I'd learned to recognize the difference. The cottage's phone. A landline I'd installed mostly for the nostalgic pleasure of hearing an actual ring instead of electronic beeping, chimes from inside the house. I don't rush to answer it anymore. At 79, I've finally learned that very few things are actually urgent, and the things that are urgent will find a way to reach you regardless. Instead, I pick up Jake's letter and finally open it, unfolding 2 pages of careful handwriting that takes me back to the boy who used to write thank you notes for Christmas presents because I'd taught him that gratitude was important. "Dear Mom," it begins, and I can see him at his kitchen table, probably writing and rewriting this letter multiple times, trying to find the right words to repair something he's only beginning to understand was broken. "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, about the things you said and the way we left things. Sarah has been helping me understand some things I never saw before, about how we've been treating you and what that must have felt like." Sarah, his wife who'd laughed about my lottery tickets in that cafe booth, who'd found my dreams pathetic and my loneliness burdensome. I wonder what changed her perspective. Guilt, perhaps, or the uncomfortable realization that public opinion wasn't on their side. "I know we can't change the past, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Not just for the last few months, but for years of taking you for granted. For treating your love like it was something we deserved instead of something we should have treasured." The words are good words, thoughtful words, and they might have meant everything to me 6 months ago, but reading them now, I feel only a distant compassion for the man who wrote them and the woman who used to need them so desperately. Ryan is sorry too. We both are. We know we hurt you, and we know saying sorry isn't enough, but we want to try to make things right. We want to be better sons. We want to have you in our lives in a real way, not just the superficial way we've been doing, a real way. I set the letter down and watch a sailboat make its way across the lake, its white sails catching the evening light like a prayer flag. What would a real way look like with 2 men in their 40s who'd spent decades seeing me as an obligation rather than a joy? Could relationships be rebuilt on foundations of guilt and public shame rather than genuine affection and respect? The letter continues for another page, detailing plans for visits, apologies to be made, family traditions to be restored. Jake writes about wanting his children to know their grandmother, about realizing how much family history they've lost by keeping me at arm's length. He promises weekly phone calls, monthly visits, inclusion in holiday planning. All the things I'd dreamed of for so many years, offered now not from love, but from loss. The loss of their image as good sons, the loss of public sympathy, the loss of whatever financial security they'd hoped to inherit. I finish reading as the last light fades from the sky, and then I do something that would have shocked the old Evelyn. I feel nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not hope, not disappointment. Just a peaceful acceptance of what is and what will never be. I've spent 6 months learning who Evelyn Harper is when she's not performing the role of grateful mother, and I've discovered someone I genuinely enjoy being. I wake up each morning curious about what the day might bring instead of dreading another round of waiting for phone calls that bring duty instead of joy. I've made friends, real friends who seek out my company because they enjoy it, not because they feel obligated to include me. Dorothy from the book club has become my closest confidant, a woman who understands that choosing yourself isn't selfish but necessary. Frank, the man who started painting at 72, has been teaching me to see light and shadow in ways that make even ordinary moments feel like art. The women at New Beginnings, where I volunteer twice a week, have shown me what courage looks like when it's stripped of everything comfortable and familiar. I have a life now, a real life, built from my own choices and sustained by my own joy rather than other people's approval. It's taken 79 years, but I've finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, between being loved and being needed, between being valued and being used. The cottage's interior glows with warm lamplight as I carry my cold tea inside and settle into the reading chair I'd chosen specifically for the way it cradles my aging body without making me feel fragile. My watercolor supplies are spread across the dining table. I've been working on a series of lake paintings that will probably never grace any gallery wall, but bring me profound satisfaction in their creation. My phone rings again, and this time I do answer it, recognizing Mrs. Patterson's number on the caller ID. "How are you settling in, dear?" she asks, her voice carrying the warmth that had been my lifeline during those first tentative steps toward independence. "Beautifully," I say, and mean it completely. The garden is gorgeous, the neighbors are kind, and I've joined a watercolor group that meets every Thursday at the community center. And the letters? Are they still coming? She knows about Jake and Ryan's attempts to reconnect, about their sudden interest in the mother they'd dismissed as a pathetic dreamer. She'd been the one to help me understand that forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing, that you can release anger without reopening doors that were closed for good reasons. Jake wrote again, I tell her. Very apologetic, very sincere. Promises of weekly calls and monthly visits and inclusion in family holidays. And how does that make you feel? 6 months ago, those promises would have sent me into a spiral of hope and desperation, would have had me planning elaborate welcome dinners and buying gifts to win back their affection. Now they feel like offers to return to a prison I've finally escaped. Tired, I say honestly. It makes me feel tired. Then you have your answer. Yes, I suppose I do. That night, I sit at my kitchen table with good stationery and write my own letter. Not to Jake or Ryan, but to myself. The woman I was 6 months ago, the woman who believed her worth depended on other people's willingness to love her. Dear Evelyn, I write, you are enough. You have always been enough. You are not too much or too little or too anything. You are exactly who you were meant to be, and that person deserves love and joy and respect, especially from herself. I seal the letter in an envelope and tuck it into my jewelry box next to my mother's pearls and my grandmother's wedding ring. Treasures from women who understood that sometimes the most valuable inheritance you can leave is the knowledge that you are worthy of your own affection. 3 days later, I write a different letter. This one addressed to Jake and Ryan Morrison in Chicago, Illinois. Dear boys, I begin, because that's what they'll always be to me, regardless of their ages or their choices. Thank you for your letter and your apologies. I can see that you're sincere. And I want you to know that I forgive you both completely. Forgiveness, I've learned, is a gift you give yourself, not a transaction that requires the other person to change. But forgiveness and reconciliation are different things. I've built a life here that brings me joy and peace, surrounded by people who choose to spend time with me because they enjoy my company, not because they feel obligated or guilty or afraid of public judgment. I don't want weekly phone calls born from duty or monthly visits motivated by guilt. I don't want to be included in holiday planning because it looks good or because your wives suggested it might be the right thing to do. What I want, what I've finally learned to want, is to be treasured rather than tolerated. And if that's not possible, and I don't think it is, after all these years, then I choose the peace of knowing I matter to myself and to the people who've chosen to love me for who I am rather than what I can provide. I hope you build wonderful lives filled with people who see your value and reflect it back to you every day. I hope you learn to recognize love when it's freely given and to never take it for granted. And I hope that someday, when you're my age, you'll understand that the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to choose joy over obligation, peace over performance, and yourself over people who make loving you feel like work. I will always love you both, but I won't sacrifice my happiness for your comfort anymore. With all my love and hope for your futures, Mom. I mail the letter on a Thursday morning after my watercolor class, dropping it into the blue postal box outside the community center while Dorothy waits in her car to drive us to lunch at the little cafe overlooking the harbor. "Any regrets?" she asks as I settle into the passenger seat. I think about the question as we drive through the small town that's become my home, past the library where I've discovered authors I'd never heard of, past the garden center where I've learned the names of flowers I want to plant next spring, past the gallery where 3 of my lake paintings are displayed in a small corner that makes me feel like a real artist. None, I say, and surprise myself with how completely I mean it. That evening, I call Mrs. Patterson to tell her about the letter, and she listens with the patience of someone who understands that some stories take time to tell properly. "You know what I think?" she says when I finish. "I think those bulbs we planted last fall taught you something important." "What's that?" "That some things have to die before something beautiful can grow in their place." "Yes," I think as I hang up the phone and settle into my reading chair with a new novel about a woman who opens a bookstore in a small coastal town. Something had to die. The woman who accepted scraps and called them feasts, who apologized for existing, who believed love had to be earned through endless sacrifice. In her place, something beautiful has grown. A woman who knows her own worth, who chooses her companions carefully, who understands that the most profound love affair you can have is with your own life. I am 79 years old, and I am finally, completely, joyfully alive. Have you ever felt like you were living for everyone except yourself? Have you ever loved someone so much that you forgot to save any love for the person in the mirror? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your stories matter. If this story touched something in your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to this channel. Sometimes the most important message is the one that reminds us we're not alone in feeling invisible. Let's make sure this reaches someone who needs to hear it today.